Welcome to Dying to Race, a podcast about those who are willing to pay the ultimate price for that top place on the podium. This is not made to glorify death in racing. It's to understand the people behind the story and whether the world of motorsport learnt from what happened. My name's Lee and I enjoy all kinds of motorsport. I have a true passion for cars and I'm also a racing driver myself. I will be covering all forms of motorsport, from rallying to motorcycle racing to F1 and everything in between. Hello and thank you for downloading Dying to Race. I just thought I'd put something at the beginning of this podcast, seeing as it's the first one, just to say I've never done anything like this before. It's the first time I've ever done a podcast and I'm learning as I go, so hopefully it sounds okay and all goes okay, but as each episode goes on I hope it'll be better and better. It's been a few years in the making. I've been thinking about it for, I'd say a couple of years, and I've just never got round to it. There's always been something that's cropped up or got in the way. But now my schedule seems to be able to fit around this. It's going to take up a bit of my time, but I've really enjoyed doing the first episode, so hopefully you'll enjoy it too. And I just can't help but think that some people might think it's a bit strange doing a podcast about people who've died, but I don't see it like that. I think since the car was invented, they were raced, and people have died racing. And I was born in Woking in Surrey near Brooklands, the racetrack, the first ever racetrack that was built for purpose. So people were racing on roads and so on and so forth, but Brooklands was the first ever racetrack. And many people died there. You've only got to jump on YouTube to see the cars going over the top of the banks and so on and so forth, and it's all pretty horrific. But I'm not doing this to glorify them by any means whatsoever, and hopefully you'll see this in this first episode. But it's more of a case of just remembering those who gave up everything to be able to race. It's a shame that people have to die whilst racing. However, there is a little bit that people watch it because of that danger. There's a reason that the riders do it because of that danger. You've only got to look at the Isle of Man TT, and the riders there who have lost friends still wouldn't want to cancel it. So it's almost like the last of the dangerous sports. There's obviously other sports out there, but there's been nothing quite like motor racing and the history of it, and also looking into the way that technology has improved and safety has improved and the tracks themselves have improved. And as I look at each individual, I will be looking at what possibly could have saved them if the technology we have now could have stopped their death from happening, and how the motorsport world has learnt from what happened. And as I said, unfortunately there's plenty to choose from. And I won't be looking at just the big names, your Ayrton Sennas and so on and so forth. I will be looking at people that have raced at a lower level. I will be looking at people that have raced in rallying, people that have raced on bikes, people that have raced drag cars. I'll also be looking at drivers from all around the world, so it's not going to be based just in Britain. Obviously I'm looking at Henry Surtees for this first episode. It's a very kind of English based podcast, but hopefully you'll get the gist of what I'm hoping to achieve. So as the season goes on, we'll be looking at all kinds of different drivers. I will hopefully be looking at cars from all eras, bikes from all eras, and go into a little bit about the car or bike they were driving, riding, so on and so forth. So hopefully it will just build up a whole picture, and it will build up a picture of what happened on the day of the crash, how it was dealt with, and what the aftermath was, and also what legacy that person left in motorsport, or the wider picture. So hopefully that's a little bit clearer as to what my aim is. So without further ado, let's have a listen to the podcast. Thank you. Today on Dying to Race, I'm going to be talking about Henry Surtees, the son of legendary F1 driver John Surtees. And I've been thinking about why I chose this first. I've been thinking about doing this podcast now for a couple of years. And the main reason was after seeing this accident and how innocuous it looked, but the repercussions that it had on obviously Henry and his family. And also the wider world of F1 and motorsport itself, because as we'll come to, what happened to him laid out foundations of making motorsport safer in the long run. Also, it was only 2009 that it happened, so it's not all that long ago. So you kind of look back to 2009 and you think that motorsport's relatively safe. The other thing, obviously, because it wasn't top level, it was Formula 2, so he's not a huge name. He's probably better known as being kind of, sadly, as John Surtees' son. But ultimately, he was carving out a decent career for himself, and I'm sure he would have gone on to bigger and better things. So it's almost just the immense waste of life in an accident that needn't have happened. And the way that it did is almost unbelievable. So I think that's probably why I chose Henry Surtees for the first episode. I mean, we could be talking Ayrton Senna, Jochen Rindt. There's loads. Gilles Villeneuve we could have chosen. But it's just something so sad about what happened to Henry and how it happened that I think it needs to be first on this podcast. Henry Surtees was born on the 18th of February 1991 in Lingfield, Surrey, in the UK. John Surtees and Jane Sparrow were his parents. He had two sisters, Edwina and Leonora. Obviously, his dad John was an extremely accomplished motorsport racer, not just in F1, where his career spanned 12 years, winning him the championship in 1964 with Ferrari. He was also an exceptional motorcycle racer, bagging 38 wins with 68 starts, which led him to being the only person to win a world championship on 2 and 4 wheels. So from an early age, Henry was destined to follow in his dad's footsteps. It was in his DNA, and John would guide and help Henry every step of the way. When looking back, Henry said about his dad, "I was fortunate enough to see my dad race at Goodwood in 1997, his last ever race. I was 6 years old, and at that age everyone thinks their dad is a hero, but this was the first time I realised who he was and what he had done in his life." When asked about Henry, John reminisces, "Starting out, we'd go off in our little truck to race meetings. While my wife would drive off in one direction with Henry's two sisters and a pair of horses, we went off in the other. We were always a competition family. But it was a special time, bunking down in the truck, acting as Henry's chief mechanic and also his chief cook." As with any racer on 4 wheels, karting is where it started for Henry, where he competed in his first season, aged 8 years old. Participating in his Coma Zip car at Blackbush, he won the first winter championship at Rye House. He also managed to get his way into the British Internations team in 2003. His first national championship didn't come around until 2005, where he picked up the Gearbox Karting Championship, aged 14. For the superb season he had, he was named as Stars of Tomorrow at Buckmore Park. This was the stepping stone to racing cars that young Henry was after. As with many budding racing drivers today, Henry progressed to the Ginetta GT Juniors, which until very recently was part of the British Touring Cars package and in itself has some of the most entertaining driving you can watch. Henry managed a decent third overall with 3 wins and 6 podiums. However, like his dad, Henry wanted to be racing single-seaters, as F1 was always the dream like any driver. It was in the 2007 season that his next step happened. Formula BMW UK, Formula BMW ADAC, Formula Renault 2.0 UK and Formula Renault UK Winter Series were all on the cards. In Formula BMW UK, he managed 7th overall and 2nd in the Rookie Cup, taking his first ever single-seater race win at Donington in the Carlin Motorsport car. Henry managed 13th in the Formula Renault UK Winter Series, and after just 2 races in the Formula Renault Main Series, he was offered a full-time place for the 2008 season with Manor Motorsport. It was an average season with a higher finishing 3rd on the national circuit at Silverstone. He then followed on and competed in the Winter Series again, where he battled for the title with James Caldardo, who now races in the FIA World Endurance Championship, gaining 3 podiums in 4 races, but Caldardo just managed to edge Henry to the title. During this time, Henry raced twice in the British Formula 3 national class, where he managed a spectacular win and another podium. Things were going Henry's way, and he was ready to make the big step up. He was starting to be seen as a decent driver and a good prospect. He was snapped up for the 2009 FIA Formula 2 Championship, which was also in its maiden season. Unfortunately, Henry didn't know that this was to be his last season of a very short career. The FIA Formula 2 Championship, headed up by Jonathan Palmer's MSV, Motorsport Vision, was introduced in 2009. All the cars of the new category had standard components and identical weight. The Formula 2 chassis, produced by Williams Grand Prix Engineering to an identical specification, was fitted with a 1.8 litre Audi turbo engine with almost 450 brake horsepower. The engines on all the cars had the same power. All the racers competed in identical conditions using the same tyres. The cars conformed to the 2005 FIA Formula 1 safety regulations. Henry managed a 7th in his first race at Valencia, but only managed 12th in the second race that weekend, but was still the top British driver. In Brno, Henry clashed with Jack Clark off the start line, and both weren't able to continue. In the crash, a wheel came loose and flew off, luckily not injuring anyone, but it was a grim premonition of what was to come. Henry took pole position for the second race that weekend, but had a dreadful start, putting an end to any plans of a podium, finishing off a bad weekend. It was then off to Spa for Henry in the 3rd round, where he finished 15th and had to retire after 2 laps in the second race. We're going to listen to a quick clip of Henry talking at Spa just before the race, and it's not the best audio quality. I've taken it off YouTube, played around with it so you can hear it a little bit better, but ultimately he stood in the paddock with all the cars whizzing past behind him, so it was even a struggle on the original recording. It's a good just to hear him speak, hear what he sounds like, hear a little bit about him, and also hear about him talking of the upcoming race at Brands Hatch.
It's going to be difficult. That's number one objective, get through first lap. After that, just, sort out past people, just start doing it. I think there's 22 cars in front of me now, so, it's a lot of cars to go, and, it's going to be a tough race.
So will it be a case of all-out attack then?
Pretty much, I think, when I get to the first lap, it's just go, there's only points up to 8, and I need points, I've had a pole position, I've had, speed, I've been up there, yet every single time I'm looking at the points on the 17th away from the championship, I really need to get my points and points on board, so hopefully, it's a big ask, but hopefully we should get out there.
And you were quick yesterday in qualifying, does that bode well for your race today?
Yeah, no, it does. Well, yesterday in qualifying, I got caught up in an accident, took the front right corner off, but I'm quick here. The car felt really good, apart from the race yesterday where the accident damage had only just been repaired. So, overall we've got all the makings of being fast, because we've got to get it together really and fast.
And moving on to the next round at Brands Hatch, circuit you have a bit of experience of, how are you hoping that to go?
I hope that goes well, and I think it will go well. It's my home circuit. I only live 30 minutes away, so it should be a good weekend, really.
And will it be important to assist the championship there then? score some points?
I think we've really got to get some points on the board. Really got to start the championship in advance again. And get some really good starts, get some really good qualifying, and really push for that podium and win maybe. Yeah.
Okay, good luck today, Henry. Thanks, mate.
Whilst Henry was carving out a motorsport career, he was also an intelligent young man. At 18 he was looking at finishing his A-levels, and one of them being in economics. He had one eye on racing and the other on an apprenticeship in karting and motorsport. The Guardian newspaper interviewed him not long before his race at Brands Hatch. He said, "As soon as this interview's finished, I'm back to my revision. Then it's 4 hours in the gym this afternoon. But as a sportsman, you've got to be honest in your enthusiasm for what you do." He then went on and explained his plan to race in a car painted in John's old colours of yellow and pale blue, a homage that he hoped would help him emulate his dad's success. He even took the same race number, 7, as his father had the year he won the World Championship. At Brands Hatch, little did he or anyone else know how harsh motorsport was about to be. The way randomness can just snatch someone away was about to be evident. Brands Hatch, 19th of July 2009, Formula 2 visited the old F1 track. Henry had a really good first race, finishing 3rd at the tricky circuit, giving him his first podium of the series, finishing behind Philip Eng and championship leader Andy Soucek. Buoyed by the result, he was hopeful going into the next race. Henry only managed to bag 8th in qualifying for race 2, behind Jack Clark, the same guy he clashed with back in Brno, finishing the race before it had even started. The weather was perfect and the conditions were dry. 24 cars lined up on the grid. The green light got them on their way. They all disappeared down Paddock Hill Bend without any issues, with Andy Soucek in the lead. The race was as competitive as any other. Henry passed through the corner named after his dad 7 times. On lap 8, Henry was following Jolyon Palmer in the number 3 car, trying to find a way through. At the same time, Clark was in 10th place, coming down the Derek Minter Straight, where he lost it on the Westfield Bend, sliding across the grass and hitting the tyre wall backwards. The crash would have been pretty standard affair, but his rear wing broke off and landed on the track, and the front left wheel broke off and bounced towards the oncoming cars, which were doing around 100 miles an hour. Clark's car came to a stop 3/4 on the grass and 1/4 on the track, and was avoided by the on-rushing competitors. But almost unbelievably, in what seemed like slow motion, the tyre of Clark's car rolled, then flicked up, bounced 3 times, heading directly across the track, and hit the unaware Henry on the head, and then bounced high off into the air and away over the barrier. The scary thing was that it didn't look bad. You could have been forgiven for thinking it didn't hit Henry at all, until his number 7 car continued on its trajectory down Dingle Dell and hitting the barrier at Sheens at a dangerous speed in itself. There wasn't any movement from Henry. The car slid along for a couple of seconds parallel to the barrier and doing a 360-degree spin at the end. The accelerator pedal was being pushed down with the rear left wheel missing from the impact, which made you wonder whether or not there was an issue with the wheel tethers at the time. Clearly, Henry was knocked out by the wheel and had no control over what happened after that. Marshals were quick to appear, along with the track emergency team. With help from the emergency services, they extricated Henry, and he was flown from South Coast Air Ambulance to the Royal London Hospital. Tragically, nothing could be done to help Henry, and he passed away later that evening, aged just 18 years old. If ever there was a freak accident, this appeared to be it. But it wasn't the first time it had happened, nor was it the first time to happen in Formula 2. In April 1980, Austrian driver Markus Hottinger was struck in the head by a stray wheel from Derek Warwick's car after he crashed into a barrier, reminiscent of Clark's crash at Brands Hatch. He was also flown to hospital, where he sadly died. So what could have helped Henry and bettered his chance of survival? I don't have the time to dwell on every specific part of this accident, but 2 things would have probably saved him. The first being the halo. The wheel that hit Henry weighed 29 kilograms. He was travelling at 100 miles an hour. Modern F1 Halos can withstand 13.2 tonnes of pressure and are rated at stopping a 20 kilogram wheel at 140 miles an hour. Although it's rated to a lighter wheel, the speed is considerably higher, so the possibility that it may have saved Henry is evident. The FIA even admitted Henry's outcome with the Halo would have been improved. The second thing that would have saved Henry, possibly, was already in place: wheel tethers. These attach from the wheel hub to the chassis and should stop a wheel from detaching and becoming a deadly missile. Unfortunately, these clearly didn't always work. Sadly, a marshal, Paolo Gislamberti, died in 2000 at the Italian GP after a crash between Heinz Harald Frentzen, Jarno Trulli, Rubens Barrichello and David Coulthard. A wheel broke loose from Frentzen's car and hit Paolo in the head and chest. He later died at Monza Hospital. Then just 5 races later, in the Australian Grand Prix, Graham Beveridge was struck by a wheel and fatally injured from Jacques Villeneuve's car. Formula One introduced 2 tethers per wheel in 2011, and I believe since then it seemingly solved the problem, and long may it continue. 2 tethers on Clark's wheel would possibly have stopped the accident from happening, but they're not always certain to work. Each tether is made of Xylon and can take 5,500 kilograms of load before braking, which can happen in an accident if the tether gets snagged or the energy of the crash is too much. Teams have to replace the tethers every 2 or 3 races due to degradation. If Henry were to race today in Formula 2 and the same thing were to happen between the Halo and the double wheel tethers, he would possibly still be with us. Tributes poured in for Henry. Andy Prio, his driver coach and mentor at Formula BMW in 2007, said, "Our sport can be cruel, but never crueler when it claims a life. It's a tragedy when this happens, and yesterday we witnessed this at Brands Hatch. Henry Surtees was a fine young man on the verge of a career in motorsport, who I had the pleasure to tutor when he was racing at Formula BMW. His death highlights the danger that we face, and my heart goes out to his parents, John and Jane Surtees. John is one of my motor racing heroes who has achieved so much over his life in the sport." Jack Clark, Henry's competitor who crashed the car that eventually the wheel bounced off and hit Henry, said, "The odds of that incident playing out like that were unbelievable. It's very upsetting and humbling to see and feel the concern of all the drivers at that time, and feel the sadness now. Henry was only 18. He was honest and a really nice guy, and he was just so quick. You'd look at the timesheet and wonder how he kept it going. Most of the time you see that the other drivers as your competitors, and most important thing is to beat them. But something like this happens and the priorities hit home. It's quite haunting. Any time a young and talented person is lost, it's a tragedy. But I think the best way to remember Henry was his pole in Brno and podium on Saturday when he was on the top. Everyone's thoughts are with John and Jane and the family." Even the pinnacle of motorsport paid their respects. Ferrari chairman Luca Di Montezemolo said, "Ferrari are close to John Surtees in this moment of great sorrow." Plus, Felipe Massa said, "I heard about Henry Surtees, and it moved me a lot. I'm so sorry for this tragedy, and I'm close to his family in this moment of great sorrow." He then went on to say, "These things remind us how much safety has to remain the priority on track and in all other places of motorsport. Over the last years, much has been done, but we can't be inattentive." Henry's death was attributed to colliding with Clark's wheel and not the crash into the barrier. His parents wanted to donate Henry's organs for transplant, where he ended up saving 5 lives. His funeral was held on the 30th of July at Worth Abbey in West Sussex. He was later buried at St Peter and St Paul's Church in Lingfield, Surrey. Later, when his dad John died in 2017, they were buried next to each other. Henry left an amazing legacy. In 2010, the Henry Surtees Foundation was founded by his father John to assist victims of accidental brain injuries and to promote safety in driving and motorsport. In the same year, the Henry Surtees Award was launched. It was given yearly to the most outstanding performance by a rising motor racer, the first winner being Formula Renault UK champion Tom Blomqvist. As mentioned earlier, the accident helped to push forward the additional wheel tethers and also the use of halo in all forms of motorsport which needed one. Lastly, a group of Henry's school friends swam the English Channel to raise money for charity in his name, and they also named the cafe in his school after him. Henry John Surtees, 18th of February 1991 to 19th of July 2009. Thank you for listening to Dine to Race. I've been Lee, and if you've enjoyed the show, then please give it a good rating. If not, let me know what I could do better, or if you have any comments or thoughts on today's episode, or any ideas on a future one, then you can email me at pmeracing1984@gmail.com. That's pmeracing1984@gmail.com. Also, you can pick up my own personal racing channel on any social media at Halfkarted, at HALFKARTED on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook and TikTok. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll catch you next time.